I think madness is integral, actually, to philosophy. And the tension in Plato is between this order, this discipline, and a certain madness, right? The madness of Socrates and then Diogenes, but also the madness of the philosopher, him or herself.
We don't try and make the shoemakers into philosophers. We let them be shoemakers. They're happy being shoemakers. We let the philosophers be philosophers. They're happy being philosophers.
It seems to me that Christianity unlocks something very special where this madness for the truth, this mad calling that a small number of people are beset by, can pursue that calling with complete radicalism in a way that the Greeks were never able to unlock.
If we accept that on some level, well, actually on every level, that everybody is in possession of a soul, whether the soul is sexed is a very interesting question, which we probably don't have time to go into in this dialogue, but maybe in a future one we could ask whether the soul is male or female. But let's just say everybody has a soul. Of course, Plato wants to say that there are gold, silver, and bronze souls, and so on and so forth. Fine. Okay, but for everybody to appreciate the order, right? So for the guardians, even if we say like there is a kind of a hierarchy, that some people are up here, some people, their techne is this. Okay, that's a society. If everybody understands their place in society, and that doesn't mean accepting, let's say, a kind of hierarchy that is negative, but rather something like people are valued for everything they do, whether it's raising children, making shoes, I don't know, picking up the rubbish from the streets. If we have a society which is dignified in its recognition of the value of every soul, right? In whatever respect the soul is articulating itself, however the techne is being performed, this is a far superior society precisely because there is a recognition of the beauty of harmony and order. And so, for example, let's say the peasant finding his wife beautiful. Okay, we know that beauty, right? Beauty is a process of the recognition of the forms. It's the access to the forms. People get confused. They think that their dick is access to the form, right? They think, the beauty of the boy or the beauty of the woman is beauty, right? This is an error, right? We know that Plato thinks this is an error. Like beauty is access to the forms, right? What do the forms allow? They allow remembering. They allow us to remember who we are, right? Everybody is capable of remembering to some degree. I agree that the philosopher escaping the cave, looking at the sun, goes mad. I think madness is integral, actually, to philosophy. And the tension in Plato is between this training, this order, this discipline, and a certain madness, right? The madness of Socrates and then Diogenes, but also the madness of the philosopher, him or herself, right? Insofar as the moment you breach certain limits, restrictions on what you're allowed to say, right? Like we live in a world that's full of restrictions about what you are and aren't allowed to say, right? If you make the wrong joke, if you say the wrong thing, of course we know the social punishments and even the legal punishments are extremely high, right? Our free liberal society is nothing of the sort, right? So that when we breach these thresholds, there is a necessity for the philosopher to be able to breach them, however he or she does it, in order to step outside of the demos, right? In order to step outside of the peculiarity of whatever regime we live in. Of course, this is not very easy, right? This is something that not many people are going to attempt because they don't want to lose their shadows, and they don't want to lose their wife or their husband or their children. They don't want to risk their thing, and nor should they. An ordered society should protect those people from tyranny, from authoritarians, from violence. A well-ordered society, in a well-ordered society, everyone would be valued, and everybody does, I believe, have a soul.
Well, Plato identifies madness in philosophy very specifically in the allegory of the cave, which is that the philosopher attempts to go back to the cave and tell all the people there that you're free, like you're and which is sort of in a sense what you're saying, is it not? And like it's actually also in a sort of way what democratic society in general is saying. They're saying that everyone can be a philosopher, should be a philosopher. Actually, not everyone should be a philosopher or can be a philosopher. Who wants to be a philosopher? The philosophically ordered polis is the one in which, precisely because philosophy is in its proper place, everything else is in its proper place too. So actually that is the society in which we don't say that philosophy is the highest techne in terms of any kind of social status as such. We actually recognize also the value of shoemaking and whatever else it is. And we don't try and make the shoemakers into philosophers. We let them be shoemakers. They're happy being shoemakers. We let the philosophers be philosophers. They're happy being philosophers. But according to Plato, I mean, this is a model which depends upon very tight and specific restrictions and trainings happening for the philosophers. It's not necessarily even, just like a wonderful thing, let's say, to have this kind of political responsibility. It might be much more pleasant to actually be a shoemaker, really. You don't have this kind of same, burden of leadership that we also saw, demonstrated by, our own philosopher king, on the weekend. Like, that is a heavy responsibility. It requires almost kind of constant self-disciplining in order to achieve that. Does anybody really want that? I think that actually Socrates even says in this dialogue, ultimately the reason why philosophers are prepared to accept this burden of leadership is not because of the rewards that it will bring them. And actually, he very clearly says there are basically no rewards, being a philosopher king in the philosophical city. The only reward that you have is that you're not having somebody else doing it worse. That's the only real reason for doing it.
If I may, let me say one final thing on this, and then Daniel, I want to ask you about what you've been learning in China studying kung fu. But I think it's instructive to compare, let's say, someone like St. Francis to Socrates. And Nina mentioned St. Francis before, so she made me think of it. But in the figure of St. Francis, here you have a wealthy, a young man who's born into a wealthy family. He decides to basically abandon all of his family's wealth and status, and quite against the wishes of his parents, who were horrified by this calling that he had to wander the wilderness with nothing whatsoever, hardly even a shirt on his back. His parents were horrified by this, but he felt called by God to do this. He felt a very direct and specific calling that he must do this from God himself, he believed. And so he went and did this, quite to everyone's confusion and pretty much to no one's satisfaction at first. But very quickly, he's wandering around in the snow, like across Italy, really quite mad, right? I mean, by any definition of the word mad, here you have a madman. I mean, this is a guy who, from an external perspective at the time, clearly this guy just went off his rocker. We've never seen anything like this before. No one's ever pursued this kind of lifestyle before in this way. And so here you have a madman who feels called by the truth, essentially, to go off and do something quite to the dissatisfaction of those around him. And if you compare someone like St. Francis and his journey and adventure to someone like Socrates, they have a little bit of common, right? They're wanderers. They're weird and provocative and pursuing their own path, right? St. Francis talks to the shoemakers in a way that is very different, right? And in a way, people like St. Francis get this kind of positive reputation from people of all social stations, including the lowest social stations, because in some ways he's sort of in alliance with the poor. He kind of makes this kind of gesture to kind of be on the level of the poor voluntarily, similar to someone like Diogenes, but in this much more elevated way that is able to kind of snowball into a kind of West European civilizational dynamic that the Greeks were never able to unlock. And that would be kind of, I think an interesting data point that has to be considered here, especially when we're talking about the city and what is justice in the city and what makes for a flourishing city. I'll just put it to you and to the listeners that it seems to me that Christianity unlocks something very special, where this sort of this madness for the truth, this mad calling that a small number of people are beset by, can pursue that calling with complete radicalism and a complete kind of universalism, but now in a way that the Greeks were never able to unlock. Now there's something about it where it can actually manifest into these increasing ripples of kind of pro-social, pro-civilizational kind of stability and harmony, and even growth and development, because it's really only in Western Europe that kind of modern economics even really become possible. So yeah, I don't want to argue that too hard or force you all to respond to all of that, but in my sense of things, that's kind of like a really important data point for thinking about how philosophy is supposed to link up with a healthy, thriving city. So okay, Dan, what's that? And it occurs to me now that it's sort of unreasonable to make a big point and then give myself the last word. So feel free to. Daniel looks like he's biting his tongue. Please, I'll give you guys the last word on this. It's a great little conversation. So we should put a nice bow on it, and then I have a few more questions for you guys. But please feel free to respond.
Well, I would just like to say, of course, that I'm the only participant in this dialogue who is not a Christian, and although I respect Christianity, I am not of that faith. I think it's obvious.
I didn't actually know that Nina. I didn't know Nina identifies as Christian. Maybe it's another conversation, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the Christian question is obviously enormously complex, and I think that, obviously we can talk about St. Francis, very singular figure, of course, in the history of Christianity. Other examples of wandering holy men / madmen who didn't necessarily have such a happy fate in the end, of course, in the history of Christianity. I don't know. I feel like this topic is too enormous to somehow pursue at this moment. So I just suspend the question basically, and
Fair enough.
and iterate my suspension. Yeah.
Well, I appreciate that, and yeah, I didn't mean to put a big new point on the table without giving you all time to discuss it and share your own points on it. But Nina, did you have a final thing on that?
I did very briefly. I think that everybody goes mad sometimes, actually, and we have a society that basically prevents people from going mad in a beautiful way, right? We have a society that's heavily medicated on various drugs, and especially America. I mean, America's extremely medicated at this point. It prevents people from feeling grief, from feeling love. Okay, we can artificially create sexual desire through drugs. Also, heavy porn use and so on. Right, but all of these subtleties of feeling and all of these actually very beautiful experiences, like painful but beautiful experiences, are the things that are being neutered and eroded. And I think that everybody, yes, in a democratic sense, I think that love is a kind of madness when you fall in love with someone. And I think that to have an understanding of the democracy of madness is absolutely integral to any thinking of an ordered state, actually. Right, there is a synthesis. There's no necessary opposition between a democratic philosophizing, a democratic madness, and a beautiful, harmonious, structured, ordered society.